Shalom Talmudim. I'm ready to do a review with you, and the importance of this is that a exam is looming in your not too distant future, so it will behoove you to have these things down. So we're just going to go over the plurals, predominant suffixes, and construct vowels again, just repeating these things to get them into your mind. And of course, the homework should help with that this week, Lord willing. And so that's the big takeaway. So with regard to the, just want to make sure the audio is working there. With regard to the plural nouns, you're dealing with masculine and feminine, right? That's the difference between Hebrew and English. And so you have a noun like susim here. Sus being the masculine form of the noun. And so then you're going to have, in order to make it plural, you add the hierik yod mem. So sus becomes susim. Plenty of examples of that. You have ach, the word for brother. Ach becomes achim. You have anything, melek becomes melakim. So this is a very standard practice, obviously. And so that's how we differentiate masculine nouns and feminine, which the feminine plural is often a change from a comet's hey, which is the typical, let's see if I can actually, I think I can just screen capture it and hopefully that should work if that brings it up. Okay, nice. So here we have the comet's hey. That's the typical delineator of the feminine noun. Not always, but usually, and then that will become ot when it's in the feminine plural. So Torah is the word for law, or para is the word for cow. And so they would become Torot or parot in the plural for the feminine. Now the dual ending is something we've also gone in. Im is the masculine plural ending. Ayim is the dual ending. So two horses would be susaim, but like we talked about in biblical Hebrew, you're usually going to see shenei susim for two horses. You're not usually going to have a dual form communicating two. It's usually body parts or idiomatic duals that you have those forms. So this is important. Feminine, feminine, masculine being differentiated between the singular and plural this way. Now, with regard to pronominal suffixes, this was the next big thing that we looked at with regard to our studies. And the standard way that the suffixes are added onto a word is to have some sort of helping vowel and then the ending. So the endings here, and again, you can memorize these or just become really familiar with them. Susi, that relates to ani. Suseka would relate to ata for you. Susek, which is related to at for the pronoun. So these are not specifically possessive pronouns, but they often function as possessive pronouns. So they can function as objects of verbs, for example, but typically, or of prepositions. So when they're on nouns, typically they are possessive, my horse, your horse. But if they're attached to a preposition, like for example, el, to or toward, if a pronominal suffix is attached to that, then it is typically just to me, to you, to her. So they're objects of those prepositions. So that's the difference, is on a noun, it's usually possessive. On a preposition, it's the object of that preposition. Hopefully that makes sense. And so this is pretty common, all of these endings. So suso, susah, all of those are indicating a relationship to the pronoun. Now, this was asked last time too. The dot, the dot there in the final hey is because this isn't actually part of the word, but the Masoretes want to indicate that this is the suffix for that. So that's very important. Now, the biggest takeaway of this as you're reading Hebrew is that you're going to have the yod in between the ending with regard to the you're going to keep the same kind of suffix, but the yod is going to be interpreted. So usually how that's going to take place is you're going to have susai would be the ending for the singular, my horses. But if you wanted to say your horses, you'd say suseka, or you'd say, in order to end on the final cough here with a 2FS ending, you would change that instead of sake, it'd be susaik. So you end it that way. And then the next one, his horses, is susav, and then suseha, susenu, susekem, suseken, susehem, susehen. So those are it's typically the A class. Well, it's really the IE class, but it's pronounced a long E sound, which is between the two parts of the word, the suffix and the noun, when it's in this pronominal suffix form. Now, the thing to remember here is that when we're dealing with these words, the pronominal suffix form, the suffix is added onto the construct form. So we'll talk more about the construct in a moment, but that's why technically this is susim, or it's supposed to be on this side, but the final mem drops off, and that's why you have that issue. So the way that this really is demonstrated is in the feminine form. In the feminine form, Torah is the word for law. So it should end in a comma's hey. But whenever it's in construct, or there's a pronominal suffix added onto a feminine noun which ends in comma's hey, that ends is transitioned to a tav. So here is Torah. So if you wanted to say Torah as in my law, you wouldn't say just Torah-e, but you'd say Torah-ti with a tav sound. And so same thing with para. Think about how would you say para, the word for cow. You would change that to a tav. So instead of para-e, you would say parati. So the key to adding the pronominal suffix on a feminine word is to change the hey to a tav for that. And so that's the same in the singular. It shows all the way down. So torati, torateka, toratek, torato, toratach, toratenu, toratekem, torateken, toratam, toratan. So you go down the list there, you have all of those there. Now for a feminine form, you don't have the Hirik Yod Mem of the masculine. So instead you have the oat. So you include the oat, and then you also include the yod of the plural to mark it. So torotai, torotecha, torotaik. So you have the same thing, but you do include the oat because it is a feminine plural. So that's one of the biggest differences. So if you wanted to say your cows, you would say parotecha. Parot is the feminine plural for cow. Parotecha. So if you wanted to say their cows, you would say, how would you say it? You think about it? Pause the video, as they say in the YouTube world, and figure it out. And then you say parotehem. So that would be their cows. Parotehem. Okay? So that should help us with making the pronominal suffixes onto words. That helps us with reading and with all of that. So look over these charts. They're all available on Populi. Internalize them. Make sure you have those down. That's really important because in pretty much every Hebrew verse, you have these pronominal suffixes at work. So you really have to know these. There's no way to know Hebrew without becoming really familiar with this. And it is hard because this is a pretty unique thing to Hebrew. So that's another thing. So the pronominal suffixes and the construct vowel changes are some of the hardest things in Hebrew. And so for the construct vowel changes, we've gone over this before, but I just want to reiterate it. The typical, in fact, I'm going to do a whiteboard here. So the typical way that I describe Hebrew vowel changes as how they work is that you have the standard vowel changes or the standard vowels like melech, for example. Melech. So that's the standard melech. And then when you have the ending added, you have more added on to the end. You visualize it like a teeter-totter, or do you call it a seesaw? Or do you call it, I don't know, just, does anybody call it something else? I don't know. Those are the only two names I know about it. So when something's added to the end, for example, the plural ending, you have, let's see here. So you have malakim. Whoops. The hierarchy is supposed to be underneath the cough there. Malakim. So malakim, notice how you have the shortening of the front. And so that's pretty typical. Whenever things are added onto the back, you have the shortening of vowels. Whenever something is going on. Now that could include a plural ending. It could include a pronominal suffix, or it could include a construct phrase. Because a construct basically is telling you that two or more words are being read together. That's the point of the construct. So if we head back to this now, you'll notice that mishpat is with a kametz on the left side there. That's the standard spelling. But it changes to a patak. Let's see if I can select this. Okay, so here you'll notice that the mishpat is spelled with a kametz. That's the cross-looking thing there. But here on the other side you have a patak, and that's really pronunciation-wise, it's the difference between mishpat and mishpat. So it's not really that discernible. The only thing is that it's a little quicker. And so when you're reading it, though, you could observe that, hey, this is a short vowel. It's one line instead of the cross. And so that's telling you that it's shorter. And the reason it's shorter is because that's telling you we're trying to get to the next word. And then also an example like now this word right here, mizbeach, that's the furtive patak. It's pronounced right before the het. That's kind of a diphthong, and diphthongs are erased in the construct. So mizbeach becomes mizbach. So if you want to say altar of God, you wouldn't say mizbeach Elohim, you'd say mizbach Elohim. Mizbach Elohim. Now here's other examples of this. So pronunciation-wise, the things to remember is diphthongs get erased, and then the vowels shorten. You just smash the words together. So shalom becomes shalom. So if you wanted to say, how are you? Remember, it would be ma shlomcha or ma shlomech, right? And you would spell it with this if you were trying to match the Masoretic pointing, because it's quickening up that pace. And so same thing, davar becomes davar, levav, the word for heart, becomes levav. So everything speeds up in construct. Monosyllabic nouns will just change from the longer vowels to the shorter. They still make the same sound though. So ben is ben and kol is kol. This is a weird spelling. Remember, I told you not to worry about it. But whenever you see this word, there's no other word that looks like it. So whenever you see this word, kol, you always pronounce it kol, not kal, because this is what they call a kametz chatuf, which is a shortened O-class vowel. And it's pretty rare. There aren't too many words. There's just a handful, and I'll teach you them as we go. And this is one of those. Anytime you read it, this is the same thing as this one. Okay, so that's the biggest one to know. Now, big takeaways on the construct is the plural masculine form, im, Elohim, banim, enaim, devarim, all of those in the plural become a at the end. So Elohim becomes Elohe. And now if you want to put a pronominal suffix on this, you use the construct form, remember. So that's why we have Eloheka, Elohaik, Elohai. Those pronominal suffixes are added onto the plural form. So banim becomes bene. So hopefully as you're doing your homework, you're able to look up these things and identify this, is that tsere yod is an important ending for the masculine construct. Oh, my voice is almost gone, and I'm only like doing a 2-minute video here. So again, with the feminine nouns that end in kamatse, Torah becomes Torat. Remember, the hey turns to the tav. Malka, the word for queen. Melech is the word for king. Malka is the word for queen. Malkat. So if you want to say Queen of Israel, which is a bit of a provocative title, you would say Malkat Yisrael. Malkat Yisrael. But if you wanted to say King of Israel, you'd say Melech Yisrael. Melech Yisrael. You wanted to say the year of our God, you wouldn't say Shana, you would say Shanat Eloheinu. You hear the Elohe, it's not Elohim, but Elohe nu. And the nu is where we get us from. So Shanat Israel or Shanat Eloheinu. So this is the im becomes the a, so banim becomes bane, okay? And then down here, the Torah becomes Torat, or para, the word for cow, becomes parat. So those are the things to keep in mind. And then the feminine plural is pretty easy. It just stays the same, but the front of it will shorten a little bit. So if you wanted to say the names of, you wouldn't say shemot, you'd say shemot. So it's just quicker. It's going to be essentially the rule of thumb. 90% of the time you'll get away with it is if you just make the word in the front of a construct a little quicker to put it together. And that's how we use any language. We typically speak in phrases, not just words. And so that's important. We already talked about this, but av and ach become avi, achi in construct, and also for a pronominal suffix. So if you wanted to say my father, it's actually the same thing. You'd say avi. But if you wanted to say your father, it'd be avika. Avika. If you wanted to say his father, you'd say aviv. Aviv. Now, the diphthong rule, like I told you, the diphthong erases. So bait becomes bait, or ayin becomes ain. So that's a pretty typical pattern. So Ein Gedi, if you've ever been to Israel and you have heard the name Ein Gedi, that's spring of the goat, basically. Ein Gedi, spring of the goat, or the ibex. And then segulate nouns don't change in construct. Melech, because those are short already and very fast. But in the plural, malakim, it becomes malke in the construct. So in Aleph with Beth, we've been taught that with regalaim, for example. Regalaim, regal is foot. Regalaim, the dual ending was, I'm trying to pronounce. Who taught me how to speak English? Not my mother. So we have the ayim ending communicating two dual body parts there, but in the plural, ragle is how you'd say that. So if you want to say hands of fish for some reason, if you would ever use that phrase, you'd say ragle dog. So the hands of a fish, which you will never use that phrase, but that's how you'd say it. Ragle ish. Did I say hands? I meant feet. So anyways, so ragle ish would be how you do it. So avde Malke, that's how you use. These are a little more unique because it's not just Malake. It's not Malake, it's Malke, because of these special nouns or avde. But we'll learn those forms as we go. The normal way construct works, though, is it'll sound pretty much similar to the other ones. All right, and then the final one that we're given on the chart here is nouns that end in segolhe are a little different than a kametse. A kametse changes to what? It changes to a patak tav. And so here, Torah becomes Torat, but here the field sadeh becomes sedeh. So it's you can hear that slight difference. Sadeh becomes sedeh, sedeh Israel, sedeh Moab, the field of Israel, the field of Moab. And machaneh becomes machaneh, machaneh Yaakov, the camp of Jacob. So those changes take place. So keep looking over this chart every once in a while to refresh yourself on that. And yeah, hopefully we'll begin to master this. Obviously, we're going to be repeating these things over and over and over again, and hopefully it'll stick with us when we do our exam. So that's the plan, at least. All right. Well, you guys have a good rest of the weekend, and we'll see you on Tuesday, Lord willing.